Alright guys, our main Wyoming rifle elk hunt is over and it was extremely successful for Josh and I. So we're going to fill you in just a nice recap of what happened. We'll try to remember as best we can day by day. And I was late getting up here by a couple days again because I went and helped my brother get an antelope. So check out that video on Relentless Hunting YouTube channel, and he got a nice little antelope buck, a nice big antelope buck. And while I was doing that, Josh was up here, so I'll have him take off the first couple days.
I think Thursday was the opener, and I left midday Friday. It's about 500 miles to come up here. It's about seven and a half hours from my house. And at the beginning of the video, you'll see that Dale and I met up in northern Colorado while he was heading south and I was going north. And I'd left a freezer at your house from archery season that I picked up, and we were hopeful not to curse ourselves by bringing up freezers, but we rented a nice cabin here in Wyoming that afforded us a garage and extra room, and you can see in the background that's where we're at right now. So we also had two friends from Missouri that we've hunted with for multiple seasons in Colorado for archery, muzzleloader, who was also going to join us. And they started on Thursday morning. We drove to Nebraska and came out here, and they were here a couple hours ahead of me. And I pulled in late Friday afternoon. On my first drive in to the cabin, spotted 4 elk and a couple deer, and just already was like, okay, great, this is already promising. And came in, got unloaded, spent the night, woke up in the morning, and actually everything I'd e-scouted was about an hour's drive from the cabin. So we had started out on those different places I'd e-scouted. The first place we went to looked really promising. The trailhead, like usual, had 10 horse trailers there, but all the windows were frosted over, so we figured all those guys are 10 miles deep, and there was two trailheads coming off of that. So we started out and walked out that, and we heard a bull bugling and met a nice local guy, and he's hunting with his girlfriend, really nice folks, and got into a whole bunch of elk sign. Didn't see anything that day. Just trying to explore and understand that coming to a new area is so challenging, so difficult. I spent a lot of time e-scouting. So that one, the first morning was, I think, a success, a good area. And that afternoon, we went to the next number 2 spot, and we found out real quick that it was an hour drive before you could even get to the trees. And once we got to the trees, it was rugged. I mean, it was, I've had pickup trucks in the past that I would take up that road, but they were jacked up with great big tires on them, and you know, pretty rough. And everyone I could see around there had brought in their big 5th wheels and parked them. They all had razors, and that's how they were hunting it, razors or horseback. So we talked to a couple people at the trailhead, and they kind of confirmed that as well, that the road just gets really rough. And so we backed out of that spot, and I had a buddy from Cheyenne, Will, who was planning on coming up. He was working late, and he made it in about close to midnight, and he'd gone with us that morning. And we came back that afternoon from the rough roads and realized, you know, we have to go back to the map again, start looking again. And the cabin that we're staying at has plenty of national forest, and we knew that too. That was really close, and BLM and state land. And we're like, well, for an evening hunt, we'll go out there. Will had a deer tag, I had a deer tag, and elk hunting's usually kind of challenging at night. So we thought, well, let's just go out there and check out what's in the backyard for the deer hunt. And we packed out, and there's a fire that's about 4 years old that came through this area, and we were surprised to find out that we walked out that, first of all the terrain just dropped off dramatically, super steep canyons behind the cabin, and it was mostly burnt. It had some little mosaic pockets in it, didn't get burnt, but we went out that night, and we immediately jumped a whole herd of antelope, which was really weird because I'm used to antelope being on the plains, and then we're up here 8-9 miles deep in the woods, and antelope hang out in the woods up here. So you'll see that in our videos. It's kind of unique. And then we started spotting deer, and we sat down, and the burn you can see and you can't see. You think it's way better than a thick area, but you get up on top, and these ridges were so steep. You get on these just razorback tops of these ridges, and you sit down, and we glassed, and we glassed up 6-8 deer that night, and the sun ran out on us, and never saw really anything that we could consider a shooter buck, and came back. And the next morning we once again kind of just went back to our original plan. I had planned C and D that were an hour's drive, so we did that again, and both plans C and D again were an hour's drive from the cabin. And we got to the end of the road, and it started getting all beat up, and that's where everyone was parking their cars and their vehicles, and then everyone was going 10 miles deep from there on razors or horsebacks. So started feeling real quick that this isn't working out too great. We went to a place that was my plan E, that had a great big lake, and took us up to Timberline. It was a gorgeous area, and again, pretty good sized trailhead with quite a few horse trailers on it. And we went in about 2.5 miles deep with Joe and Jim, and got up close to Timberline, and just it was absolutely gorgeous country. We saw lots of deer sign. We weren't seeing any elk sign, and got a couple deer on film, some smaller bucks, and I glassed up I think it was a bull. It was thousands of yards away up. He was all the way up on Timberline. So we backed out of that place, came back down. By the time we hit the trailhead, there were a couple folks there. We started talking to them, and they said, "Oh yeah, this area is really good for deer, way up high at Timberline, but like we haven't seen any elk. We haven't heard any elk bugle. All we hear is wolves every night. We don't think the elk are in here." So we kind of checked that one off the list. And that's kind of what you have to do with a new area. Is you just kind of you have your plans, and you always have to have 5, 6, 7 plans laid out, because you don't know until you get here which one's going to start materializing. So that night we came back. Will left. He had to go back to work. It was Sunday night, and you had just come back from hunting with your brother. And we said, okay, hey, it's all we have. We got time for a night hunt. We're here at the cabin, and we can hunt out the back door. So let's go check this place out. And I have a deer tag too. So hey, man, maybe we'll get a deer. I'm kind of just thinking that's all that might be close to the cabin.
We only had about an hour. But I've been driving all day, so I really wanted to get out and look around. So that's what we did.
Yep. So we took him out on the same spine that Will and I had gone to. And like every new area, starting to figure it out. The spine we went out on, eventually we eventually understood was maybe not the best spine for elk.
Mm-hmm.
So we went out on that, and we sat down, and man, Dale was eagle eye on a spotting scope. Didn't take him about 10 minutes, and he's found.
I got lucky. I was looking back this probably west, and kind of got bored with that view, so I started looking back the opposite direction, 180 degrees opposite. I had just sat down, and I was actually starting just to pan with my binoculars, and I saw something, and it was 1,200, 1,500 yards, I don't know, 1,000 yards away at least. And I just could make out this animal's body up against this light colored background. And so I grabbed my spotting scope really quick and look, and I located it, and sure enough, it's elk. And I see it's one cow, but I start looking, and up behind and above her are multiple elk, and there's a decent sized bull. And so we real quick look at the sun. We're like, I don't know if we can get close enough. We can't shoot this far, but and how are we going to get there quick enough? So I shoot just a real quick video so you can kind of see them, because I wanted you to be able to see them, but we didn't want to take much time filming because we only had 15 minutes of light, if that. And so trying to figure out the best way to get close enough to them, and we thought, we'll go back up and we'll circle around, and I was like, man, it's just mental math, and you're like, it'll be dark by the time we cover all that territory. And I look at Josh, he looks at me, and we both have an understanding look. Yeah, we're gonna have to go down and up and down and up and down and up with these like this and like this and like this. And we just strap up and we just go. And we were hauling fast.
And the cool part was we had Jim with us. And when Dale had spotted the elk, he described where they were at. And we have great ways of describing, look this, see this tree, move down. It's tough to try and describe to someone what you've picked out at 1,000+ yards away. But he did a great job, and I looked at my binoculars, and it was neat. I could see he was a big enough bull. I could see he had a rack, and he was chasing the cows. So I was like, oh, wow. And our buddy Jim was down the ridge, 300 yards away from us. So Dale was packing up his spotting scope, and I ran down the ridge, and I went to Jim, and I said, hey, Jim, we got elk spotted. We're going to go after him. You can come with us if you want. And he goes, hey, I got a buck over here. I'm like, okay, but there's a bull over here. So I usually, if I have a chance between a bull and a buck, I usually go for the bull first. So he said, okay. And Jim's hunted this long enough. I wasn't worried about it. He knew what was going to happen. So I ran back up to Dale. And by the time I got to Dale, he'd had everything packed up in his backpack all ready to go. And we just dove off. And it was elk. We call it elk speed, where we go as fast as you can possibly go, which is not really as fast as an elk, but we call it elk speed or beast mode. And we just dropped off that sucker, and it like you said, it was up and down and up and down. And there's wildfires up here, guys. Like, we're sucking in. It's terrible. So by the time we got to the top,
visibility was kind of bad just because of the smoke. Just kind of each day it would be a little bit different. And that day was one of the worst as far as like just a campfire smell, taste in your mouth.
the time you got to the top of where we were going to stop, it was hard to stop coughing. And Jim wasn't for too far behind us. He
mountain goat.
He was, he's got 15 years on us, and he was just a few minutes behind, and he caught up. And we sat down on that ridge, and I pulled out the binoculars and pulled out the camera, and it was, man, it gets dark so fast.
It does. I mean, we could see the elk just a little bit. Just you'd see pieces of them. So they were still located there. We're finding a rangefinder. Rangefinder's finally starting to pick stuff up, and it's like, okay, this is, what was it, 500, 560, something like that?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, all right, that's doable, because we did all this practicing all summer long. We went a couple trips out to the 1,000-yard rifle range, and I read up on my reloading, my load for my 300 Win Mag, and we were both ringing metal all the way to 800 yards, so check out that video. So we put our time in to be able to make shots like that. So like, all right, this could actually happen if he presents himself like he did when we were 1,000 yards away. If he does that again, he's going to probably go down. And so I'm struggling to get everything all set, get my bipod. Unfortunately, we were trying to go so fast, I didn't find a nice level area, so I'm trying to set everything up on an angle like this. So I get it kind of adjusted and get somewhat comfortable and get my scope up there. I know the distance, and I got my scope dialed in, my turrets dialed in to the right distance. And I can see some legs, and I can see like a pile of elk legs, like they were all just meshed together, and they were moving. And then it just kept getting darker and darker, and you could see kind of elk drop off here, but we never got that nice, clean broadside shot at all.
No.
It was just way too risky. It'd been a flock shot if I'd taken a shot.
Yeah.
And then it just got too dark. If we'd had another 10 minutes, we probably could have skirted that hill up or down a little bit, and maybe got a better angle or something, but... So that was kind of cool that all that happened, and as we were packing up to leave, he sure enough started bugling. As soon as it got super dark, he bugled several times. We got a couple of those on video.
He sure did, and he came out early that night. Then we had not. We'll talk about it later in the video, but the elk frequented that area, but we just, to my earlier point of scouting out, I said we took the wrong ridge. I took a ridge I had taken with Will the night before because I knew about it and it was comfortable. But if the ridge that we were set up on to try and take the shot was the ridge we ended up hunting mostly for the rest of the week. And if we had taken that ridge that night, there would have been a shot on a nice bull. He was a nice bull.
Yeah.
So the elk, a bull never came out that early in the night again the rest of the week on that ridge. But I was sitting there I agree. I was sitting there with the camera, and You could see elk bodies. You could see they were up on top of the rock, which we'll talk more about. And then they were around it. And it just, the ethical, it was just, we all sat there. We talked at length and we videotaped at length. And there was never a good ethical shot there. And we just said, okay, hey, we know there's elk in here. We didn't even know there was elk in here. We thought there was just deer in here. And it's right by our cabin, so we were kind of excited about that. And then as we walked out, I tried to elk bugle when they want to bugle, and not always when you have the record button on. So as we walked out of there, I got a couple, but man, he was bugling and bugling and bugling, and I was just so elated with the fact it was like October 4th at that point, or October 3rd, and got elk bugling, and elk bugling right out of our back door of our cabin. So it was like, wow, okay, well, everything else we've seen the first 2 days was kind of depressing and didn't work out. And I mean, I e-scouted it. The places were awesome. There was gigantic bulls coming out of pickup trucks as we drove in and talked to people. I mean, big bulls. And they're like, yeah, they're all in there. But e-scouting doesn't tell you that the road's so rough you can't drive a pickup truck up it. So, we were excited, and we decided that night, we talked about it on the video, that hey, we ought to come back here tomorrow, because even though we did find one of our first 3 areas was a good promising area. It was thick, it was flat, you couldn't use your glass, and we're big believers in long distance shooting, getting up on a ridge, having some openings, giving yourself a chance, and this place provided that because it was a burned out area. So the next morning, we went out down the same ridge where you set up and almost got a shot on the bull, because we realized that's where we thought there was elk over there. And we sat there and glassed, and sure enough, we glassed up some more elk on that ridge.
Probably about 150 yards above where we saw them.
And there were some cows going out, so we figured that was them on their way out. On the back side of that ridge was all dark timber on the north side. So we started theorizing, okay, well, they're coming over that ridge late in the evening, and they come down, they bugle, and they rut down in the valleys, and then they go back up in the morning, and they're in the dark timber, and they come out at night out of the dark timber. So, and that was kind of what we saw for the rest of the week. So we probably spent 30 minutes after daylight on that ridge glassing, and we saw those cows. And was it that morning we saw the cows in the far part too?
No,
not yet.
It's different yet.
So we hiked down, and these are steep. These hills are steep. I mean, they're more than 45 degrees steep. They are no joke. And so you get on a ridge and walk it down, but even the ridge coming back up is steep, and if you have to drop off that and go over, it's really steep. So we walked all the way down to that bottom of that ridge, and that was just about where public land ran out. And we cut across, and we had Joe with us. And Jim had decided he wanted to go over and look at a different ridge. So he went to a different ridge. And we walked across the flat, and we thought, well, we saw the cows going up into the dark timber, and maybe we figure out, we hadn't been over there yet, so let's go check what that dark timber looks like, and that maybe there's some pockets over there we could see elk moving around. So we made it like maybe a quarter of the way heading towards the black timber, and we heard an elk bugle in the lower area, not where we saw the cows. We heard an elk bugle, and we're like, okay, well, we'll kind of start pursuing that. And we made it up maybe just the first ridge, got to the top of the first ridge, and Jim called us and said, hey, I got a buck spotted. He looks like a pretty good buck. So Joe's already, we're down in there quite a ways. And Joe's like, well, he doesn't have a buck tag. He's like, well, I think I'm just going to stay here. And it was windy that morning. And we got down, and once you got down in there, the wind had died down. So Dale, being an awesome cousin, said he'd go with me to go try and see if we can't get on this buck. And we were joking around. We're like, yeah, we're going to get all the way over there, and it's going to be some little 2-point. Or it won't be there. But it was a long ways to get over there, wasn't it?
It was. So but we didn't stop. We just elk speed again, even though it was for deer. We used the elk speed again. It was the reverse of what we'd done the previous evening when we told you we dropped off and got within range of those elk when it got too dark. It was the exact reverse course of that.
It was.
And because that's where Jim was sitting, was that same ridge that he liked, and so we had to come up the back side of it because we didn't want to skyline and let the buck see us, because there's basically a ridge here and a ridge here and a couple ravines in between there. This is the main elk ridge, and this is the ridge where Jim was sitting, and the buck was down on the other side of it. So we had to come down and kind of come straight up that thing, get all the way to the top.
Yep.
And so we went up there, and we're pretty sure we're getting close to where Jim was, but we were just trying to be real careful, and finally came up, and I could see a little bit of orange, so we knew we were in the right general vicinity, and take it from there.
Yeah. We did. We made sure that it was a much easier path to get on the spine of that ridge and just walk it right up. But we knew that if you did that, we'd skylight. So we hung off of it and had to go through all the thick stuff and jump over all the dead logs, and came up, and we got just right when we came up, and Dale was the first one to spot Jim and see the orange, and we came up there, and he's like, yeah, he's like, there's this buck down. He's been down here for 30 minutes. He's just hanging out in here with a couple does. So we got up on top, and I was amazed. The buck's still there. Like most of the time in Colorado, like sometimes that stuff works out, but most of the time, like at any point in time an animal decides to move, it's so fast, it's all over. So I sat up real quick. I wasn't messing around, and I was just thrilled that he was still there. But I had to sit down and make sure, and he had to describe where he was at, and I had to find him. And then Jim was unsure whether he thought maybe there was 2 bucks in there, and he said one was a smaller buck. And so I'm trying to, and it's even though it's a burn area, it's still pretty thick. So we're trying to pick out the trees, and I'm getting glimpses of a rack, and I'm sitting down, and I range him, and the range I hit on the first deer is 333 yards, and it's a ridge like that. So my bipod is adjustable, so I have this much leg on one side and that much leg on the other to try and make it level. And I'm looking, in my scope and making sure it's level and getting set up, and I'm laying down in the dirt, and I get on this buck, and Dale's helping me out. He's got the spotting scope out, and we're looking at him, and it's so thick. I'm like, all I can see is 2 points. I'm like, it's just a little 2-pointer. And Jim keeps going, well, there's a little, I think he said, yeah, there might be a little buck in there. So I'm like, I'm, trying to make sure. And then all of a sudden that buck turns sideways.
He turns his head sideways, and I could clearly see in the spotting scope he was a nice 4-point on one side.
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, all right, he's a shooter.
So Dale helped me.
I would consider him to be a big enough shooter, and I think he's a little bit bigger than the buck he got last year. So and that was your question, is he as big as the buck I got last year?
Yep.
I was like, yeah.
And Dale helped me. He was helping me out on the spotting scope, and I said, hey, man, like, he just turned sideways. I'm like, is that... And that's the exact question I asked you. He said, yep. So, my bad. I don't think anyone was ready. Jim wasn't ready, and Dale wasn't ready, and Dale had a camera. And
I had the camera. I was almost on him. And then Josh decided to go ahead and shoot.
Well, as soon as Dale said, yeah, he's a good buck, he's bigger than the buck he shot last year, I'm crosshairs on his chest. And guys, so many times I've done that, and I've waited, and something happens and they decide to leave, and so I was like, hey, I'm rock solid right now. I got my rest good. I got crosshairs on a chest of a deer, so I just pulled the trigger, and everyone was surprised except for me. And I pulled the trigger, and you could tell it was a hit. It was a hit. It was a good hit, and he ran down the hill, and he was kind of just he kind of jaunted down the hill. He was going real slow, and he stopped. And when he stopped, I shot again, and I do think I missed him on the second shot.
Yeah, I think that one.
I think somehow I missed him on the second shot, and then, gosh dang, I lost him and that stuff. I lost him, and Dale was right on top of him, and I think he started getting a little irritated with me because he started describing where he was at, and I just could not find. Even though we have this whole, most of the time we can hook up real quick on. Look at this tree and look at that slope, and this is how you get there. And I just couldn't do it. But he talked me into it to understand where he was at. And then the worst part is where he was at, I couldn't see him from my nice flat dirt spot. So then I started going down the ridge, and it was sloped, and I could not get any place comfortable or any kind of a good. And so finally I moved all the way over to the right of you, and I found this old dead burnt out tree, and I was like, okay, this is good. And I put my gun on that burnt out tree, and like, now I can get on him. And he'd bedded down, and I think that would have been it. He would have expired then. But I don't, if you can get another bullet in an animal, and if it goes, put him away quicker, is what I usually do. And man, this buck was tough.
He was.
Because
by now I've got the camera, so check out the footage. It's pretty good high resolution detail of everything that's going on that he's describing now. So check that out.
I put the crosshairs on him, and I let it rip, and it's a little high, and I hit him in the backbone, and I probably should have done it.
But he fell all the way over again,
and
completely flat.
And then he gets up again, and he's trying to get up,
again.
and he's, you don't stop shooting until an animal's done. So he gets up again, and I put another one right in his chest. And when we got over there, like other than the high backbone, which I'm not real happy about, the other two shots were right in his chest.
And this is no little gun. This is a 30-06, and we upgraded ammo for elk with 190 grain Accubond long range, like the most kinetic energy bullet we could find, and that's what he's using on this deer.
Yeah, it's a big bullet. So that buck was being tough. So then it's awesome. We know he's down. He's good, and we're sitting up on this ridge, and we decide we're like, well, we're gonna have to go down this. It's steep. That ridge was steep, like 60, 65 degrees steep. And luckily, we're only about half a mile, a little less than half a mile away from the cabin. So we weren't worried about a long pack out, but we just knew it was steep. And we have a lot of gear on us. So we contemplated for a minute, and then we were like, okay, we're going to stash half of our gear in the woods. And so we made a nice little stash of gear, and we covered it up with our coat so we didn't need any more because it was warming up to kind of camouflage it, keep honest people honest. And then we dropped off this steep ridge and went all the way down, and we found them, and we got them all cut up. And the plan always was that we probably wouldn't make it in one trip. So we went down there, and we probably could have, but we left the head of the Cape, and we came up, Jim, me, and Dale, and Jim went straight back to the cabin, dropped off his load, and then came back. Dale stood up on top, and you glassed a little bit more because there's still hunting left to be done. And I went back down for the second trip to pick up the Cape and the head. And then I should have stuck by that theory and said, okay, now that we have it all up on the ridge and we're only half a mile away from the cabin, we should take 2 trips. And I didn't. We loaded everything up, and it was painful, but we made it back to the cabin. So that was a great, fun morning. So we were on the board in Wyoming at that point in time with a buck down.
Success. Nice buck.
And we had some nice, we marinated them, and we had some yummy deer steaks a day later with that one. And then that night we went out, and
so that night we went out, and now we have this mysterious elk ridge that's got this really weird rock formation on it. It's the same exact rock formation that we discovered them on the first night. And so, and it was the cow and that morning was right above that, and we're like, there's just something about this valley that they like. So we decided to use our newfound knowledge of where they potentially will come out in the evening, and we set up on the 500 yard away ridge instead of the 1,000 yard away ridge.
Yep.
And we decided to have our hunting party split into, I think it was 3 different groups. So we're all set in our different spots, but we've all got a little bit different vantage point on that mysterious little elk rock formation.
Yeah, and you and Joe were up high.
We were up high.
And I was in the middle.
Yep.
And then Jim was down low. So we had this whole ridge covered with 3 different spots.
And we sat there and glassed and glassed and glassed, and finally all of a sudden Joe said, hey Dale, I see something. And he looks, and we look at the top of the ridge, and sure enough there was a very tip top of the ridge. It's pretty bald, but there's a whole bunch of pine trees in this one clump, and you can see with your plane just naked eye there was a cow elk up there at the top because she was up against that black looking dark timber.
And we heard them bugling. We heard them coming.
Yeah.
Remember that? Yeah, we heard a
bugles.
bugle before we saw the cows.
And so then the cow comes out and she's grazing up and over the ridge line, and then we see another, it was a calf with her, and they just screwed around on that hilltop for what, 30, 45 minutes?
They did.
Because they were kind of a distraction, honestly.
They were a distraction.
Because they were fun to watch. We got some good footage of those.
Well, I kept thinking that that's where the rest of the herd's going to come.
Well, that's what I thought too. The herd's going to follow suit. So I kept focusing on where those cows came out and anywhere around there. But I always kept going back to this rock formation. Like I'd glass over here and I'd come back to the rock formation probably every minute or two. Like I didn't want to miss anything because it's not that far from the top of the saddle where they can come down. I mean, they'll be on top of that rock pretty quickly if they're moving. And so nothing happened. We're just bored looking at the cow and the calf, and it's getting dark. Like, we're not gonna have anything happen tonight. And so I'm taking one last look at that stupid cow and calf, and then I look back at my elk rock and with my binoculars, and I'm like, oh crap, there are elk there. And they were already there. Somehow I missed them coming down.
I had the same experience. So I got the phone scope out and I was screwing around watching this cow and calf, and I got some really cool footage of it. You guys will see in the video. They were neat to watch. But I kept looking back to where she came out, thinking, okay, that's where the rest of the herd's going to come out. And then I was just like you. I was like, well, what about that rock? That rock was gonna whatever. There's like elk there, right? And I think I saw it just maybe like 10 seconds before you saw it.
Mm-hmm.
I looked over that rock. I'm like, wow, there's elk. I mean, it was just like there was no elk there, and then there were elk there. And I got to see the whole herd come down, and it was a big herd of elk. And I watched them walk all the way down. As soon as you could, the very first opening you could see above that, I could see just cow, 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 and then I saw a bull. And then it was just like, wow, they were just, I mean, it was instantly they were there.
Mm-hmm. And so when I first got to this little perch, we thought would be a pretty good sniper type perch. I got my gun out, I got everything dialed in, I got it in a prone position, I practiced, I laid down, I had everything just where I could just have a perfect prone shot on that, about 530 yards or something like that. And so I noticed those elk, and I instantly, first I say, oh crap, and then I throw my spotting scope out of the way, and I just land on my stomach, and I'm already on the rock, and I've got elk in my sights, in my crosshairs, 16 power magnification, and they're just massed together. There's just a flock of elk up there on that same point, on the same weird rock formation that they were when we saw them the first time.
There were 6 cows that came out on top of that rock. And we showed in the video what that place looks like. It is very bizarre. All of us think it's bizarre. It's such an itty-bitty area, and it's straight cliffs, and they really love that little rock. And there were 6 of them. And they were just packed in there, and they wanted to be there.
And then so, from my vantage point, and then we can talk about from your vantage point, because mine ended up nothing. I couldn't see below the rock formation where the bull was.
Yep.
But I could clearly see these cows, and one by one they'd peel off, and I had this perfect broadside view, and they'd stand there broadside, single file broadside, and I'd have my crosshairs right there. I'd be like, please grow antlers. Please grow antlers, or the next one that steps out, please be the bull, because I can totally make this shot. It was rock steady, and the elk goes and comes down, and the next one steps out and down. It's this cow, 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 and it's starting to get pretty dark at that point. I don't see any bulls or anything like that, but I'm still just focused and aiming just in case. But then Josh has got a little bit different vantage point.
I was down the ridge a couple hundred yards, but at just a different angle, and I could see the bottom of below the rock. And we still debate about that. I'm not sure. It was, and like we said, the night before, they come out early enough. If we'd have been on that ridge, it'd have been a done deal. But this night, they came out really late. It was getting dark. And I could see the bottom of the rock, and I could see the bull. And the bull was running back and forth. He was running the cows hard. And I could see the 6 cows up on top that Dale saw, and I could see them all coming off the side just like he described. But I could see the bull. So I don't know if the bull came down the trail originally, but he must not have gone. He never went to the rock. He somehow peeled off of that, went down below. And I had my gun on him, and I knew it was what the yardage was from the night before. And at the bottom of the rock, it's 500. So I have a 527 pin, and like 500, just maybe just a little low on the chest, but I felt comfortable. I was all set up, and I had my safety off and my finger on my trigger, and I had my crosshair on that bull, and he never once cleared a cow. There was always either a cow behind him or a cow in front of him, or when he ran in between cows, it was just for a split second, and I was just following him just like any second. And he was, I mean, at 500 yards, you can see a rack. He was a big bull, and it was a good 30, 45 seconds where I'm just following everywhere he goes, and he's never not covered up by. There were so many cows, so he was obviously a big herd bull with a lot of cows, and I was a little frustrated that night. I was just because it was like, man, it was that close, and I just could never. And I was doing the right thing, because even a couple times he had cows behind him. You know, a younger, more aggressive, dumber hunter might take that shot. My bolt will go through him and kill something behind him too. So I didn't want that to happen. But it was really fun to see those elk that night.
It just got too dark.
So the next morning, we don't leave elk to find elk. So we came down the same ridge again and sat up and started glassing again. And we started seeing cows.
Same spot.
Same spot, near that rock again.
The magical elk rock.
Yes. And
Josh was a sharpshooter with his binoculars. He saw the elk a lot this time. He'd study. Oh, there's an elk. I just pull up, and sure enough, there it is. And so he sees a cow, and so I'm thinking, all right, I'm just gonna hurry up and get ready for a shot. I know it's a cow, but there could be a bull here, and
yeah,
so
smart.
So I just drop everything. I peel my pack off, and I get my bipod, and I run up the hill about 15 yards where I see a nice clear opening with no branches in the way, and it's fairly flat. So I go prone and I start ranging. I get some ranges while he's still glassing. He's still confirming they're cows. He's getting some video of the cows, and I'm thinking, I've turned on my GoPro, and I'm kind of just looking. I look at my binoculars and everything, and I double check my ranges again, like 4 different spots, so I know if I see anything else. And I'm like, all right, that's cows, just cows, but I'm just gonna hang out here for a little bit. And all of a sudden I see another brown shape, and this one comes up on the tip of this rock formation.
He walked right out to the end, just like those 6 cows did,
all by himself, and looks out over the valley. And at this time, that rock's 503 yards from where I was sitting, and it's still really low light. We thought it was a cow at first, because it basically was a spike, but we didn't know it at the time.
No, it's a long ways away and very low light.
And he's just messing around up there, and then he turns around and turns his head, and he looks back up where the cows are going back up over the hill. And I think he got nervous that he was going to get left behind, because he turns around and he starts trotting away. And when he does that, he silhouettes against a dark tree, and I'm like, oh, I can clearly see he's a spike.
Mm-hmm.
And so I make a million decisions in about 5 nanoseconds, and I'm like thinking, I have this expensive elk tag, and I've driven this whole way, and I've had these big ideas about getting this big monster bull, but I know how hard these guys have been hunting. I hadn't seen really any big bulls except for the first night when I got there, and we got lucky and saw that one. And this territory is rugged, and the week's getting away from us a little bit, and I'm just like, And my freezer is almost empty from last year's game, and the Colorado elk season was a bust. So all this was going through my mind instantaneously, and I'm like, if he stops and gives me a shot, I'm going to take it.
Well, and you did the right thing. You did the right thing because you got down, you got ready if something was going to happen. And I'm a firm believer, like to the deer story, is you have a clear, good, ethical shot at a legal animal, you get on it, and if that's the animal you're going to harvest, you don't wait. There's no reason to wait, because guess what? Things happen real quick, and you don't get another shot. So you did everything perfect. You were in the right. All 4 of us could have taken that animal, but you were the only one that was set up, ready to go instantaneously, and he didn't give you much of it. He didn't give you much time.
Check out the footage. Josh did an excellent job of filming this one. And he starts walking up the hill away from me. First he's trotting, and then he starts walking, and then he he slows down and then he turns and he stops, and so he's like this from me, right? He's a little bit quartered away, but pretty much broadside. And so I've already dialed my yardage back in to the appropriate yardage, knowing what that is. And I just take a super controlled, just like I've been practicing all summer long, just really nice slow squeeze shot, and just hold it on the whole time. Good follow through, and it just center punched him.
Oh,
he just dropped.
Unbelievable.
And
Just
dropped
rock solid
dropped
shot.
and he rolled down just a little bit
yards.
and he was down for a while. I think he was probably stunned too, because it went in the chest perfectly on one side, but since he was quartered away a little bit, it kind of went through, and it went through a front shoulder on this side too, so that was probably a shock. And then he kind of came to a little bit and he started to struggle a little bit, and he didn't look like he was going to get up, but then all of a sudden he did right himself, and he was basically bedded, and he looked like he was going to get up. And I'm like, I don't want to chase an elk all day if he's wounded.
Nope.
And I was already had another one in, and so I already took another shot, and kind of didn't tell anyone I was going to take that second shot. And Josh was filming, and
I jumped.
Kind of startled everybody. I
wasn't ready for it. But I tell you what, you did the right thing, and you put 2 bullets right perfectly through elk's chest at 525 yards, back to back.
It was pretty awesome.
It was incredible. And it's just like that deer. My first shot probably would have done it. My second shot would have done it. My third shot did it. But you when the animal keeps moving, you keep putting lead down range. Mm-hmm. That's what you need to do. So you did the right thing, and man, you were.
It was fun.
Boilerplate. 2 in a row at a long distance. So that's all our practice. It all goes back to our practice and our research and getting the right ammo, and we feel comfortable at these ranges, right? Like, you don't know. Don't try this stuff if you haven't done it. Mm-hmm. So we read a lot about it.
We were ringing the metal 400, 500, 600, 700, 800 yards. The last time I went to the range, I did that all the way through twice, and then I was like, okay, I'm good.
Get dialed in, get comfortable, and when you know you can, make that lethal shot and that ethical shot, then that's the range. Mm-hmm. We know what range we have to stop at. So I was super fantastic excited for you, because that was an incredible shot.
So yeah, I went back up, and I backtracked when I went to go dress him out, and I found where he was standing, and I reverse ranged it, and it was actually right at 545 yards.
545. Wow.
545.
That's a poke.
It was fun.
That was awesome.
But so the funny thing is, I'm just staring at the down spike, and you guys start hearing the bugle.
Yeah.
And you start looking around, and across the canyon, there's this beautiful meadow that's probably 2,000 yards away, something like that.
Yeah. And it's a big meadow.
We could clearly see there was some elk running across this meadow, and we thought they were all cows. We didn't have a spotting scope out yet, so I dig it out for you guys to look and stuff like that. And we didn't know for sure until we were downloading and doing all the video footage editing today that one of those was a pretty big bull.
Yeah.
Probably was the bugle we heard.
It was, probably. Yep.
But anyway, we were also getting bugle answers here, so I start doing a few locate bugles. And we hear a bugle here, one there, and one over there.
Yeah.
And so Jim is always the wonderful helper that he always offers, and he's all, well, I'm going to help you go take care of your elk. And I was like, well, why don't Josh and Joe, you guys go chase bugles? And I was like, we got some work. Take your time getting over to us, and then we'll rendezvous at my spike. So.
Yeah. And we dropped down all the way down to the bottom of that toe and went across and the flat and came up over another ridge, and the bull was bugling, but he was a little bit of a distance away, and Joe said, I'd rather go help those guys get that elk. So he was kind of like Jim, just I kind of want to chase the bugle. I knew Dale could take care of the elk, but that's what, so we talked about it a little bit and agreed, and we went up over the top and came back and dropped back down, and we got to cut up your bull and pack him out in 2 trips.
Took 2 trips, yep. It wasn't horrible.
Four of us took a pack out, and we came back in with 3. And the nice part was always the second pack in, you dump out half your gear.
Yeah, you feel like you're flying with not.
So we took a lot bigger load the second time, and they probably were almost the same each time, right? Mm-hmm. A little lighter load the first time with all your gear, and the second time You
It's
jump
just
off.
more comfortable. 'Cause
Don't
you
need a spotting
you don't
scope
have
to
your
go
gun, you
pack
don't
out
have all
meat
the
in the middle of
other
the day.
equipment you have. So yeah, just an empty backpack, and then it's full of meat when you come back.
Always with the 45 though. Lots of grizzlies up here.
Yep. But we got a lot of good footage of even harvesting and cutting up that elk. I'll split it off as a separate video too, but I did, when we watched the hunting video, there's like a fast forward version of our kind of Daniel relentless hunting method that we'd like to take game apart. But check out that little teaser, but then there's a whole bunch of other videos on how to do that for other kinds of game, deer, elk, and antelope and stuff too. Technique works really well, especially if you're nowhere near a road, which is usually where you get your animal.
Yeah.
So we hauled them all the way back, and let's see, shot them about 7:15, and I think our final load of meat, we were back at the cabin by 2:30, something like that.
Wasn't too bad. So we got them into a freezer that we regulated, kind of like a refrigerator, because we knew we couldn't cut them up all that night, and then we still want to go out and go hunting. So
keep it cold but not frozen. So
yeah.
that was our plan.
Yeah,
It worked out pretty well.
We went out the next night, and I think it was pretty quiet.
Yeah,
I don't think much happened that
everyone
night.
was pretty tired too.
We were pretty tired. We
We
sat
were
down on
okay
the
with it
ridge
being
and
kind of quiet.
we didn't see anything. So the next morning
Next morning
was not quiet.
no.
So the next morning we went out and we decided because, we still waited about half an hour looking for elk.
In that
we
spot.
did. We waited and thought that maybe they'll come back out again because Dale had just gotten his spike.
And we'd seen the tracks now, like on the mysterious.
When we went up on the other side, we saw how many elk tracks there were.
I mean,
over
it's
there.
just pounded there. They
Yeah.
just love that area, so
Yep.
it wasn't a waste to try it again.
No. So we waited around about half an hour after daylight, hoping that they'd come back out on that ridge again. And no, nothing came out on that ridge. So we walked down to the bottom, and I think we heard a distant bugle that kind of helped us motivate us. So we walked all the way down to the bottom and cut across the flat and started going up the ridges. And we heard a bugle in the distance, and it's the same kind of bugle that Joe and I'd heard when we were coming around to help you pack out your spike. So we're like, okay, we're gonna go chase this. And we went up over the first ridge, and we thought, man, it just felt like it was gonna be right there. And we stopped, and Dale was tagged out, so he was helping bugle.
I was locate.
So he'd locate, and then he'd bugle again. I'm like, oh no, it's the next ridge. So we go down, go all the way across the flat, go up a steep hill, get to the top, stop. He'd locate, and he's right there on the bottom. And we dropped down in it real slow, and I think about the third time we did that, we dropped into one, and I was really thinking he was in there. And we jumped an elk, and it was a cow, and we thought, oh man, are we busting them, right? And I think she was all by herself. And we went up the next ridge, and Dale did another locate bugle, and the answer was 3 ridges over. And we're like, oh.
We were discouraged
We're
because
like,
that reminds you of Colorado
we're
when
like,
the elk
holy-
just run.
Holy cow, that thing was just like, really? Like when it answered us earlier, it was close. So we're like, okay, he's on a mission and he's going away from us. And we also knew kind of the direction he was headed was going to be towards private. So we're like, oh, this is not going to work out good. So at that point in time, we stopped and said, okay, well, there's a big, huge ridge, a gigantic, big, huge mountain. We can go get up on top of it. We get up on top, and maybe they'll swing around and get back onto public again. But it was my call. I said, let's go get elevation. Let's get elevation. Let's see what's going on. We can call from the top and figure out. And I was actually thinking, let's just keep going deeper because I'm crazy like that. So we're already about a mile in, and we get up on top of this sucker, and we start hearing bugles again. We heard the bugle that was the distant bugle, and it sounded like a herd bull. I mean, it was really impressive bugle. And then all of a sudden I heard like kind of a quieter bugle out of the bottom right below us. And I was like, oh, well, okay, the herd bull. And I kind of thought, nah, the herd bull's probably on private from what we're looking at on Onyx. But I'm like, there's a quieter bull in the bottom. I'm like, I'll be okay with the satellite. So, and he's close and he's on public. So I sat down and I did what you did. I learned your lesson from the spike. I sat down, I got my backpack off. I'm on a steep slope looking straight down a deep ravine. So I get my backpack off, I put my gun on it because there's no way my bipod's going to be tall enough. I put my gun right on it, and I pull out my cow calls, and I just start cow calling. And I cow call, these bulls are going nuts. And that what we thought was the herd bull starts coming towards us. And so I tell Jim, is with us, I said, Jim, we were kind of skylined. I said, hey, get into the trees on the backside of this ridge and make sure you don't skyline yourself and run up those trees and go get towards where that herd bull's bugling at us. I'm going to stay here. Maybe I'll get a shot at this satellite bull that's down the bottom. And he said, okay. So he hopped in the trees and started going. And I keep cow calling. That herd bull just keeps getting louder and louder and louder and coming to us, coming off a private. And then those satellite down on the bottom, every once in a while I'd answer. I had it completely wrong. Maybe there was 2 herd bulls, but the one in the bottom was not a satellite. He was a herd bull. And I sat there, and there was an open park at the bottom, and then there was a big patch of timber, and you nailed it. You said, hey, that bull's in that timber below the park. And I was like, man, I don't know if he's that far or not. He said, no, that's where he's at. And so I'm sitting there with my gun ready, and you even said, hey, did you range anything? I said, yeah, okay. So I pulled up my range, and I ranged the park a couple different places. So I had an idea of how far it was. And it was about 460 in the bottom of the park and about 470 into the trees. And I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I look down, and I see cow. And it's this itty-bitty little opening. Cow, 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 cow. And I'm like, I tell Dale, here they come. They're coming. And I pull up, and I'm aiming right at that itty-bitty little opening, and about 15, 17 cows come by, and then I see this bull walk out, and you can tell instantly, just because he's twice as big as any of the cows.
His body was massive.
His body was gigantic, and I could see a rack on him, and he came out, and he stopped, and the last 3 cows went past him, and then he was the last one to walk into this little aspen patch. And it was only an opening about maybe 25, 35 yards wide, and that's where they all came through. And I was like, oh my goodness, they didn't come into the park. They're skirting the side of the park. I'm lucky I even saw them, and that was my opportunity. And I had ranged different spots of the park. I hadn't ranged that part yet. And he stopped, and I could see a silhouette behind an aspen tree. I'm like, this isn't a great shot. But I pulled down on him, and I put 600 yards on him, and I pulled the trigger. And I now know 600 yards was too far. But it worked out perfectly, because whatever that shot did, the whole herd turned and ran through the middle of, well, not the middle of the park. They turned and ran through the bottom of the park. And it was like trees. They
about 90
degrees. They turned 90 degrees and came back the other direction. And the first big, huge clump of animals were all cows. But again, his body was so big, he just instantly, you could see where he was at. So instantly I could see, okay, there's the bull. And I'm on him, and he's running through the trees. And I knew that I had ranged the bottom of the park at 470 yards. And I have a pin on my BDX scope that's 527. And I knew he was in the trees below the park. So I'm like, he's probably around 500, but 527 is going to be the closest I got, and that's not too bad. So I put 427 right on him, and I'm following him on my scope. 527. And I'm holding on my scope, and I'm just keeping on his chest, and I just touch it off. Finally got a clear shot on him, and there's no cows around him. That's the other thing, because he was covered in cows a lot of the time. And I'm just watching. I just touch one off, and all of a sudden I see all the cows turn, and at that point in time, they turned and came right up through in the open park. That was the first time they came out in the park. And all the other times, they're always in trees. And I could just see a huge freaking clump of cows come up through the park. And the other, like 4 or 5 cows split off and went the opposite direction. And I'm looking, I tell Dale, I'm like, I saw a whole bunch of cows come this way, and I saw cows go that way. Where'd the bull go? And he's like, I think he's down. And I'm like, no, where'd he go? And he's like, no, I think I saw him drop down. And I'm like, I hit him? I got him? And he's like, I'm pretty sure he's down. And then I'm sitting there, I'm looking, because I'm just wanting to, like, all the cows, like, there was another shot there if he was in the cows. And I was like, do you see him? Like, help me out. And he's like, no, dude, I think he went down. And so we stop for a second, and he gets out. He zooms in on the camera. He's like, "Yeah, I think I see him. He's laying down there dead." And then
it was hard to see because he was laying upside down.
Yeah.
That's kind of what threw me off. I was like, it didn't look like traditional elk color because it was his belly and his legs were kind of up because
all that dark color.
He got hit so hard with that big old bullet of yours, it dropped him after a few more steps. But then he got all tangled up in some down timber too. I think he tripped.
So we sat up there on the ridge, and Jim came over, and Jim was working his way over to try and get to the other bull that we heard bugling. We thought was the herd bull, and it could have been a really big bull. The way he sounded like a big bull, and he came back over and he said he saw the whole thing. He's like, I watched you shoot, and I watched him fall down. I'm like, you saw him fall down? And so I'm like, I got 2 guys telling me they saw the bull fall down, because you know how it is. Like, I was right on him, and we pull the trigger. You usually lose sight of something after you pull the trigger, and so
he finally believed me when I got my spotting scope out.
Dale got a spotting scope
zoomed
out.
in on it.
Dale got a spotting scope out, zoomed in on it, and I looked in, and I'm like, yeah, that's a dead elk. I did it.
White tips on those antlers that you could see exposed. I was like, you just done something, cousin.
That was fun. So then we celebrated a little bit, and we hiked off that mountain, got down in there, and got to the bull. He was, I don't know yet. I have some questions I'm gonna ask your dad, but I can't. He has a really nice front. His front forks or his front tines are really nice. His back end is pretty weak, and for an elk to have 20 cows in this country, where we've seen big bulls, just he didn't quite have the mass that I thought he should have to be able to be a herd bull. But we're kind of thinking maybe he was an older bull that was regenerating a little bit. And I think he has 1 point that's not broken. He was obviously a fighter. He broke out, his right half is broken in half. He was probably a small 6, and he broke off the top of his left half. And every single one of his other tines have big, huge chips and breaks in them. So he must have just been a bruiser, obviously. So, which is cool. That's a cool trophy to have too. So, and his body was ginormous. I have never seen an elk body so big. It took 2 of us to carry a hind quarter. The hind quarters were way over 100 pounds.
Yeah,
they were heavy, big.
I've processed a lot of elk, and when I was growing up and everything, and that's probably one of the biggest ones I've ever come across.
From his back, his hump on his back, from his backbone to his hump, was like that. It was.
The back strap was. It was like.
Oh my gosh! It was taller. It was longer than I was tall. So it took us a while to break down that animal, and then there's a private road, and we were just right. We got lucky. We were watching really close because we talked about earlier that we knew private was right there. And we were really close to private, and there's a private road that goes down in the bottom, and that would have been a great way to get this bull out, because at this point in time we're a mile and a half, mile and 3/4 back in there.
1.86 miles.
Okay, almost 2 miles back in there, and we told you it was up and down. And this stuff is steep, and so I start saying, well, we got to find a way to get a hold of this landowner and see if we can't. I'll pay a trespassing fee, whatever I have to do to be able to use our road to get to this animal. And Joe that morning had decided he wanted to do some new scouting, and he drove around his truck and he wanted to scout some new areas. So he had actually not gone with us. It was just me, Dale, and Jim, and so we had to get up on top of a hill. And AT&T works really good out here. Verizon doesn't work. Jim's AT&T worked great. We were sending all kinds of messages to Joe. Joe has Verizon. He was getting none of the texts at all, nothing. And so we get the bull mostly broken down, and still he hasn't responded yet. And we're like, well, he could be out driving without service, but now it's noon. He still hasn't answered yet. So I get on the radio. We have some handheld radios that we use as backups, and I'm trying to get hold of him, and he's not answering. And so we come back down there, and we're like, okay, well, I said I'll take a load, and I'll go all the way up to the cabin and find Joe, and we'll see if we can get phone service and we can call these folks. And I'm starting to debone a hind quarter, and the radio starts making noise, and we were down in a hole. So I had to get up on top of a ridge, and it's Joe. Joe's calling me on the radio. So I told him what was going on, and he's like, yeah, I haven't got anything on my phone. And I said, well, there's a private road down here. We got to figure out who the owner is and give him a call and see if there's any way that we could use their road or pay him a fee or whatever we got to do. And he's like, well, I've been talking to the neighbor up here, and he's like, let me put him on the phone. So he puts the neighbor on the phone and talk to him, and he's like, yeah, I've lived here for 6 years. He goes, I know that person. They're not going to let you on their land, no matter what. Doesn't matter. And I was like, okay. I said, well, guess we'll have to pack him out, right? We've done it before, but this was a gigantic bull, and I knew it was going to take, it would be midnight by the time we got out of there. So I was just kind of I'm happy, got a big bull. It's going to be midnight. This is what we're going to do. And then he said, well, actually, he's like, I got a neighbor who's he's got some mules, and they would probably hire out some mules to pack it out. So I come back down, and oh, by the way, they also said there was a grizzly bear sow with 4 cubs in the area that had a bad encounter with a hunter that about less than a mile away from us. So now I'm thinking, okay, great. There's an active grizzly bear that's interacting negatively with hunters, and I got a whole bunch of meat down that it's going to take me to midnight to pack out. So I come back down and tell the guys I got bad news. And Jim comes back and goes, well, what about the mules? I'm like, yeah, he mentioned something about it. He's like, well, go back and call them. So I went back up the hill again. I call him. I'm like, okay, hey, ask him about the mules. So we come back down, and I sit back down again, and we go back to work, and we're deboning, and we're just about done deboning. Radio starts making noise again, so we go back up to the ridge and get it back on the radio, and he says, I'm heading down. I got 2 mules heading your direction. So I was like blown away. Joe was amazing. So
it was within what, half hour, 45 minutes from
no time.
You got,
and we didn't know this, but the stables are only 300 yards from this cabin.
Yep.
So he just walked down the road and talked to people, and they're like, oh yeah, great. We'd love to make some money this afternoon. So I told these guys they had a couple legs left they were working on, and I said, hey, I'm gonna go meet them as fast as I can. So I took a bottle of water and my 45 and leave my pack, and I just start as fast as I can, going mile and a half back to meet those guys. And I got just about the time I got to the bottom of that toe, of that big ridge, they were about halfway down it with a horse and 2 mules. So I met up with them and grabbed a mule, and we came in, and it was just an absolute lifesaver. It was so wonderful to pack. Those animals were awesome. So we packed them to the gills with 8 bags of meat. That bull had 8 big bags of meat.
It was probably almost like 12 to 16 normal bags of meat if you're going to put them on your backpack. But since we knew that was happening, we loaded them up, and yeah, they were very, very full. And I was elated to see those mules come down the hill and with those huge packs on them. And I was expecting donkeys.
Mm-hmm.
No, these were like
huge.
Like I'm
huge,
about 6 feet, and he was like that, and he just stood there, and he was solid muscle everywhere,
and so sure-footed. This was some broken up bad country with lots of fallen timber, and they just did great.
And then as we put the meat on there, they didn't even blink. They didn't move. It was like they were just made out of stone.
Carl and Bess. And Carl was a stud. Holy cow.
Yep.
So
we even got to put our backpacks on there. We only had to carry 2 of the lightest backpacks on our backs, our heavy ones, and all the gear and all the spotting stuff. That was all strapped to those mules.
Yep. So that was wonderful. We packed them out, and we actually we led them right to our front door of our cabin. Unloaded them in the garage, where we brought up our freezers that we thought we were jinxing ourselves with, but we glad we brought them up. And then we spent the whole next day doing nothing but, we went out in the morning, and then the whole next day cut up meat and filled up 3 freezers. So that was a wonderful conclusion to our hunt. So we went out the next couple of days, tried really hard for Joe and Jim to just that same park where they had elk 2 mornings in a row. There was when we went, like the day I got my bull, there was elk in that same park again.
Yeah, that's true.
So the next couple days, we suggested that, hey, we go hunt that park, because 2 days in a row we'd had a herd of elk and a big bull in it, and they didn't show back up again. And I don't know if maybe I don't know. I think the elk maybe just moved to the next ridge, or.
But you heard them bugling tonight, you said?
They were out there bugling tonight, out right off the back point. So they're back.
They're back. They took a day and a half vacation to some other valley, and then they came back.
I think they just bumblebeed around someplace else for the last couple of days, unfortunately for Joe and Jim, because we really wanted them to be able to get an opportunity too. But so we sat around all day today making videos that we'll post, and this is our uncut recap of the Wyoming season. It was really nice after, our early archery season was challenging. It was early in the year. We knew it was going to be challenging. Colorado was a complete bust with the fires. It was very, very discouraging. So we were a little bit discouraged coming up here, but Wyoming usually doesn't disappoint. So
It did not disappoint.
the only bad part is that it would take 4 years to draw this tag again, unless we get lucky, and
We might get lucky again.
Hit
We
on the
got lucky
random
this
draw
time.
again. So we'll bounce back and forth between elk hunting and antelope hunting, whatever it gives us the next couple of years. So we have the second week of November starts our late mule deer hunt in Colorado, which we had a lot of fun last year. We both have tags this year, and we both have our long distance range game dialed in. That should be lots of fun. Both my girls have a deer, doe, and a buck tag, so hopefully they have some fun. We get see some of that footage. And then we have Wyoming whitetail.
Yep.
And somehow I'm the only person that got any antelope
Yeah,
tags.
what's that about, man?
So I got 2 doe tags. My girls got none. Dale got none. So Dale's gonna help me go. Hopefully, we'll knock down a couple antelope. That'll be our November Thanksgiving time hunt. So, and then we have a late season Colorado mule deer hunt. It goes all the way to the end of January that we had a lot of fun with, long distance. So lots more hunting to come.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching. See you next time.